Welcome, everyone, to the very first Robert Fragoso Show episode. That's a mouthful, actually. I didn't realize that. I am joined by Southern California's most well known, probably, investor, Robert Fragoso. How are you today, Robert?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the intro. I appreciate it.
It's actual. I'm just being really honest. You've, for those of you who don't know or happened on this and go, oh, I found an investor podcast to listen to. Robert has literally cultivated Southern California, has one of the biggest databases of agents, investors. How many flips are you currently working on for the year, plus or minus, just to give everyone an idea?
I'm actually probably down this year only in that I've got some other ventures going as well. But I call it, I don't know, 50 plus or minus.
Okay, just so we know what we're talking about here. These are the first episodes. There are, I don't know how many as we start this recording. There will be a part one, part two, part three, or however many I decide, just so you get to know Robert. So this is part one, for those of you who don't get it. You can Google Robert, or you can go to aremodeledhome.com. Is robertfragoso.com up yet, Robert?
It's not up yet. I actually just bought the domain. Oddly enough, it was owned by some kid in Brazil who was a soccer player or something like that for a while. So I finally picked it up.
Well, there you go. Or you can try that. Either way, if you type in Robert Fragoso, you're going to wind up on something about Robert. Is there an email or a phone number you want to put at the top of the show?
Yeah, I think we can put just my direct email, which is robertfragosojr@gmail.com, and just use that one.
Okay, there you go. Let's start from the very beginning. Just give everyone an overview. How did you get to here? I'm not really necessarily after your time with the lenders and everything you did and how you built your list. I mean, is this ultimately where you wanted to be? Kind of take me all the way up to, I always wanted to flip and be in real estate and be a mover and a shaker, which you are. And an influencer, if you can handle that one.
Yeah, I've always loved real estate. I mean, I kind of got introduced to it at a very young age, and I mean, I like to tell people that I don't really know what else to do because it's sort of true. I've done a few other things, but I mean, this is really kind of my passion. I do like to fix and flip space itself, but more overall, just the real estate space and how it morphs and spotting different opportunities. And that's kind of what, where I find myself now is, I think identifying some new, markets and new, I think opportunities that are out there outside of what the norm is doing.
Oh, yeah. So what was your first deal that you did?
First deal. Well, first deal was, what now everyone calls wholesaling. Back then, it wasn't quite coined that just yet, but I had met an investor who was really kind of mentoring me and teaching me the ropes. And I went out, door knocked, and found a deal for him and was just paid a fee for it. So it was just it was really just a wholesale deal. And I did, that's kind of the first few deals that I did in the first few months. And then, I'd asked him if I could be part of one of the deals. I really wanted to learn kind of the fix and flip side of it. The market was very different back then, where it was really, you're buying houses that weren't really super fixers. You were buying things that were in pretty decent shape, and doing more of a subject to type, seller carryback business. So it was a little bit different back then than it is now. And that's kind of what I mean about, the business, just morphing. I was online recently, and I forgot which Facebook group or whatever it was, and someone had made a comment about, it's so difficult to find deals. And what I don't really find it difficult to find deals. I mean, I think it's not necessarily just because, everyone calls me with a deal. It's just that I look for different things, and we kind of morph what we're looking for based on the market. And, we try to adapt and figure out what the next niche is, and then work that niche. And most people, they stay the course and they stay with what they know, and rather than adapt to, maybe the changes that are in the marketplace, or what the seller's needs might be today, or the buyer's needs might be today, and really kind of trying to figure out the business. So there's a lot of people that just don't like to experiment. There's behind the scenes, there's a fair amount of experimenting that goes on, and it doesn't always win, but it does create some new niches that, and once you figure out the one that wins, then you kind of just go into that niche, and usually for a little bit, you're kind of one of the few people doing that before the masses kind of figure it out and then jump on it.
What are the niches you're seeing right now?
Oh, all right. Well, here's secret sauce, huh? Right away.
Yeah. Well, not full secret sauce. Hey, look, people are listening to this to get into the brain of Robert Fregoso. I assume that this is a SoCal-centric show, but you and I both know investors are looking for any tidbit. So maybe not full secret sauce. How about a general secret sauce?
Here's I will say this. If you look around the country right now, and I think that I'm going to start doing business around the country as well, as just primarily, outside of the lending, when we were doing the loans that we're doing, that kind of the company grew and was in multiple different states. I think I'm going to do something very similar, both on the investing and lending side, but also on the purchasing side, to be, in other states, and maybe even the joint venture side, which is probably what I have kind of come to enjoy a little bit more, is joint venturing and doing some mentorship through joint venturing, where we bring in all the capital, and someone brings in a deal that's a good deal. So I haven't quite figured out which states to go into. There's, if you're looking for opportunity, I just read something, I think it was on, I don't know, Bigger Pockets or one of these sites, that was talking about, I think it was St. Louis. Oh, it was Hotwire. That was talking about St. Louis as the hottest flipping market in the country right now. And I'll tell you, I looked at the St. Louis market years ago. And one of the problems with St. Louis as an absentee investor is that is a really boots on the ground type market. If you're in the suburbs, it's a little bit different. But if you're in like St. Louis proper, and on the Missouri side of St. Louis, that's a really unique marketplace that changes block to block. So if you're just looking at comps, you can really make a huge mistake. And I hadn't seen another market like that. So, while there's some opportunity there, if you actually know the market and you're piped in, I would caution, that type of absentee investing in that particular marketplace. But there's marketplaces like Florida, and even New York, New Jersey, high REO type states, mostly the leftover mortgage states that have a judicial foreclosure process versus a simple foreclosure process. Those still have a lot of REOs, and therefore there tends to be opportunity in those. And the market's gotten better. So, I'm not a doomsayist. I know there's a lot of, kind of zero hedge type people that make a lot of money off of, selling fear, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that.
Are you pointing at me at this moment as a marketing guy?
Well, listen, we have a bet. You owe me dinner.
No, you're right. You're right. The year isn't over, and I'm hoping for a huge comeback by the Fed. For those of you who don't know, Robert and I did a Phoebe event, and I very openly said the Fed had to raise the rate, and the Fed has continued to lower the rate to keep stimulating the market.
Back then, this was in November, November.
Yeah. It was almost over.
Yeah. And I think it was November, if I remember correctly. But anyhow, I remember back then, we were talking about everyone else was saying, "Hey, the market's slowing down. It's doing all this." I said, "No, it's really not. It's seasonal right now." Some of the other panelists were in kind of high end homes, and they were seeing a what they perceived to be a drop in the market, and it really wasn't a drop in the market. It was an oversaturation in the market, which is different than an actual drop in the market. And so, and I say that in that the oversaturation is a foreseeable, if you're looking at housing starts or new construction permits before you invest in an area, that is a foreseeable, issue. And so I don't see that as a decline. I see that as just oversaturation for, a limited buyer pool that can buy, those $3, $4, $5, $6 million homes. And when you just have a glut of investors thinking, "Hey, we're going to do fantastic," and then they're all competing, and the best price, best located, best view one is the first one to sell, and all the buyers compete for that one, and then move on to the next one. If yours doesn't have those attributes, you're just sitting there forever. So that's kind of what was happening in that marketplace. And so the other thing was that, we didn't really have, high oil prices. So without high oil prices, in November, it was very difficult to sit there and say, "Hey, we're going to have this inflation." And, without inflation, there's really no reason to kind of raise interest rates. So that was my, pseudo thesis on why that wouldn't happen, even though the Fed had raised interest rates, which I thought was more of a kind of political, move than really an economic move, and proved to be kind of more correct.
Well,
in that,
it was beyond more
there.
correct. For everyone, my point of view was that the only way to stabilize home prices, which have literally gotten out of control, because of the lack of availability and the lack of new home starts, I assumed the Fed would raise the rate to kind of slow down the overall buying, because you and I both know this, Robert, right? So based on 2010, we had all these foreclosures. They're not really foreclosing on people. We can get into that whole discussion on some later episode. But we lost about half the inventory to foreclosure or foreclosure process that ultimately became rentals. And so we have half as many properties now available for purchase and resale. That's not just a number I made up in my head. We are at the highest level of non-homeowner ownership in the history of the United States. And in California, based on California Association of Realtors, Robert, by 2025, 90% of this state will be rental, according to CAR. They actually projected that at their last event.
Not my number. I have a hard time seeing that, but I will say that with regards to like inventory and the market and the inventory levels that you're talking about, one of the problems that I think that a lot of people do and is that they look at this marketplace and they see the values, and the values have surpassed the values of the last bubble, and they you've got the bubble 2.0 people that think, "Hey, we're in another bubble." Okay, but you got to adjust it for income. You've got to adjust it for inflation. You've got to account for the interest rates being lower than they were now. And when you look at real timeline and real data, we're not there yet. And I don't think we're going to get there for a while, because you have to have this boom before you have the bust, and you do have to have generally housing starts kind of play a big role in it, and we're still underperforming on housing starts. Where I think we're negative 1.5% based on the inventory levels that we had or what we should have from an index standpoint. And if you look at what's happening in the marketplace, is really you've got a trade-off. There's a few different factors. The first one is you've got a trade-off between millennial buyers and baby boomer buyers, and they're basically swapping, right? So there's baby boomers that are kind of retiring out or dying off, or it's certainly the silent generation that's more kind of dying off, and the millennial buyer is such a big group, as was the baby boomers. So you're just kind of trading inventory, and you couple that with that starting in like the 1980s, we started to really overbuild homes, and if you look at like the war homes and everything that was built from the 50s, 60s, and maybe even part of the 70s, the homes were 800 square feet, 1,200 square feet, 1,500 square feet was kind of a larger home outside of the mansions or what have you, and that was the norm. And then enter the 80s, and you've got 2,000 square feet became the norm, 3,000 square feet in the 2000s, and then you had the what they call the McMansions, in most neighborhoods where everyone was just maxing out whatever they can get on the lots. And so consequently, you saw housing tenure, which is the amount of time that people stay in homes, expand. And so if you look at previous cycles, that housing tenure used to be 5 years, then it went to 6 years, then it went to 7 years, and now we're over 10 years. And so if you look at housing tenure, that's a lot of inventory that normally would cycle through the marketplace that now doesn't. And then you combine that with low housing starts, and you don't have the makings for a bubble. We have high employment. We got the best economy in the entire world. You've got record-breaking economic expansion, record-breaking unemployment. We've got more jobs available than people looking for the jobs. It's not the making for a recession. So all these people that are like, hey, yield's inverted. Holy shit. All right. So what? It's still, you got to have all these other factors. And when you don't have the factors, it just doesn't mean as much. So, if you're looking just purely at like, hey, we're looking for recession. All right. We've already been in a manufacturing recession. We had one, came out of it, and they're probably going into another one now. And it's doing nothing to the economy. So when you relate that to real estate, which is just purely, let's say, demand and supply has shrunk over the past few months. It was increasing before. Now it's shrunk down. Now you're starting to see, a little bit more activity, and we're in the kind of cold months. We're already in the winter months and projected to have a very cold, winter this year. So if you account for a very cold winter in let's say the Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard, you're going to see numbers in the future that look like, hey, we're having a recession, but take the weather into effect. It's not really what it looks like. So I think that, from an economic standpoint, we're still looking really, really well. We've not had a negative real estate print year in an election year. And as you get closer to the election, I don't care which side you're on, they're both going to sell fear if the other one wins. And then people tend to slow down. So as you get closer to November, right? You're going to have I think we're going to have a great spring.
It's actually my line of work. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Lee Honish. I am the producer of Perfect Blue Studios, and I host this show for Robert. I probably should have introduced myself, but my day job is marketing, right? And I talk about Cambridge Analytics, and I talk about the Netflix movie, and I talk about what I do for a living. And I always tell people, what direction do you want me to scare people into? And they always take that negatively. I don't know if that's scaring isn't the correct term. I think it's, the reason I jumped in, I think it's steering more than anything, right? So you're after a niche. So you're just trying to steer people into whatever the niche is that you're after. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So we started this whole conversation, went off on a tangent here. We were talking about niches and what
That's why your shows are great.
Right. Yeah. It's my ADHD. We're going to go everywhere. So, but here's where I think that the niches that are out there, they're still, at least till the end of the year, if they don't extend it as this opportunity zone, I think there's really some big benefits. I think that, more so now than ever before, I think having the proper strategies in place, from either tax standpoint or even from a business standpoint, is very, very important. More important than it had been in the past. I think also that, these opportunity zones, whether if you're looking at, the local markets or maybe some of the larger MSAs that have, incentives for investors that, I think a lot of people maybe aren't even looking at, largely because they're depressed, and I'm speaking specifically of areas like, let's say, Puerto Rico or things that were storm damaged that also had some economic issues from, stemming from even the Clinton era where they got rid of some incentives for some of the larger corporations that were doing business there. There's regions within the country or territories that really create very good opportunities. If you're looking to just stay local in, let's say, the Southern California market, I mean, there's really, dynamic things that are happening right now. And I will say this is really the secret sauce for me. It's always been the secret sauce, and it's just held the test of time, is to be aware of changes that happen in regulations, or ordinances, within either a local, city, or state level or county level, because those breed almost all of the niches all of the time. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's as simple as a zone change. Other times it's like, here in California, we've got the state government that's kind of dictating zoning to a lot of the local, kind of city levels, and they're forcing, opportunities, or forcing affordable housing that creates opportunities for investors. I mean, really, like in California, there's really, I mean, no more R1 zoning for, if you're smart about it. And, so you can always build a kind of duplex or even a triplex now, on a single family lot, which, it's now mandated. So there's a lot of changes that are happening that will absolutely create some opportunity. With new opportunity and new niches also comes along, a little bit of a risk in that, you're waiting for appraisals and lenders to catch up. And now, while that may sound a little bit scary, it's also where you can make the most money. So, I mean, there's changes that have happened even over the course of the last week that, we're still trying to fully understand, because there's some pretty great opportunities right now. So when I hear people say, hey, there's just not enough deals, I think there's, the issue is you're looking probably for a no-brainer deal on the MLS that you can wholesale and make, X amount of dollars. That's not really the market right now. That was the market in the REO days, and everyone did that because you could find stuff on the MLS very simply, and you could still find stuff on the MLS, but you're fishing in a barrel that has 100 other hooks in there as well.
Right.
And so if you're not the efficient operator, you're going to find it difficult to get stuff there. The efficient guys can outbid. If you're looking for things and you're a wholesaler, I will say this: if you're a wholesaler, you really have to kind of relook at your business model. If you're not doing the direct marketing, doing the mailers, doing the door knocking, working relationships, sending it to, probates or pre-probates or death certificate type, homes, absentees that are, I will say, kind of silent generation, or, the very early baby boomers. I think that you need to figure out that niche and get deals directly. I think my personal pet peeve that I think is a soft con is where you've got wholesaler and the daisy chain of wholesalers, and everyone inflates the value a little bit to fit in their fee, and then they deflate the cost of repairs to make the deal try to work for an investor, and they're looking for really the sucker investor rather than the guy who knows, what it's going to take. And so, I was looking at a property in Cerritos yesterday, and, I'm looking at this property, and two of the comps are flips, and they're both listed at, I'm going to say, $120,000 above their clear market value. Okay, like they're sitting there. One of them had almost 120 days on the market. The other one was a lot less. It was like 57 days or something like that on the market. Both of them probably no activity because they're so overpriced. Nice rehabs, but they paid close to what I looked at was a pretty clear, as like retail value, and so it's kind of a case of I think someone who just didn't know the market there, or didn't have the right data, or didn't do their homework, and now are stuck. And I would say in both of those cases, those investors are going to probably lose a good $80,000 to $100,000 on each one of those deals. So there is a fair amount of risk, but I do think that there's great opportunity out there. So I hope that helps.
No, it's really good. And I'll throw one out because you brought it up. San Diego County has made it very viable for putting granny flats. You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I went to the event, which was to go out and seek out larger lots. I was thinking you could seek out larger lots, work with the homeowner, put the additional space in, maybe from a building perspective, maybe making that money. But I'm just telling everybody who's listening, San Diego County is all about adding additional units, and they made it abundantly clear. My whole big thing was trying to find, no, I was trying to, at the time, and I've kind of backed down from it, I wanted to, for those of you who don't know, I used to build houses. That was I did that in the 90s. I haven't done one recently, but I was into things that were already approved by the state, and I was trying to find prefab stuff that was approved by the state that would be easy to drop and cut down the costs so that there would be a margin to make those types of investments make sense. And I still really haven't done it. It looks like you have to go through a process. It's faster because that's what they want. They want the additional units. But yeah, it's not like having things that are already Cal State approved. I can't find it.
So now you touched on San Diego, right? Which is a great niche. And this was, a lot of people may still not know this, is that basically what San Diego did is they got standardized plans approved for certain types of granny flats, right? Which is, or ADUs, which is an accessory dwelling unit. And they said, look, you can, rather than go to an architect, if you have this space and this kind of characteristic, which was typical for those areas, then you can use our plans that are already approved, and you just basically have to add them to the site specs, which means that rather than wait for your plans to get approved, they created a fast track system for you to basically utilize plans that had already been approved. So, that's a smart play. I hope LA does that, or some of the other cities follow suit, because I think it's kind of a smart way for the city to be efficient, and also from an investor standpoint, if everyone's dropping in the same kind of granny flat, those are good comps, right? I mean, you've got identical situations, right? I mean, that really helps out, and so it helps an appraisal standpoint for the resales. So,
that seems to be the weirdest hang-up at this moment. Was based on the event I was at. They were having issues appraisal-wide because now you've got partially approved plans that rush through. People are adding these. It should be gaining value. It's not really out there yet. So, like you were saying, this is one of those weird pockets where things haven't quite caught up.
Right. Yep. So, I mean, I do think there's that. I mean, from my standpoint, I like the homeowner plays. I think are good. I think the straight fixers, apartment buildings, I like. I definitely like the joint ventures where we either, we could just lend money as well. We can just put out the money to do that. But I kind of like the mentoring side of it because it's easier, and then people, they make money as they go along, and so that's kind of a fun way to learn. Um, I mean, I think there's great opportunities out there right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm with you on what trying to find a specific niche and focusing on that to propel someone's income. Everybody check in to part 2. Robert and I are going to keep talking. I'm going to keep this conversation going. This was part 1. Information about how to contact you?
So I guess the email, robertfregoso.jr@gmail.com, is probably the easiest to remember, and that it's my full name at Gmail. There's also robert@aremodeledhome.com. And then I'll tell you, I get copied on so many emails for all these transactions. So every escrow, title, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I get, their conversations really just fill up my inbox. So if you really need to get me, I mean, the best is really to text me. And you can text me. I try to clear out all my text messages by the end of the day. So you'll get a pretty good response there. It's 949-572-4468. 949-572-4468. That's probably by far, if you're just reaching me directly, that's the best.